Outgun anything you can't outrun. Outrun anything you can't outgun. The Germans figured this out in the 1930s when they built the Scharnhorst-class battleships, vessels fast enough to escape British battleships, armed enough to annihilate British cruisers. Commerce raiders that could dictate every engagement they entered. Choose when to fight, choose when to run. Never get trapped. The doctrine emerged from necessity. Germany couldn't match Britain's battleship numbers after the Treaty of Versailles restrictions. So German naval architects asked a different question. What if we stop trying to win the fight Britain wants us to fight? The Scharnhorst and Gneisenau proved devastatingly effective in the Atlantic, precisely because they refused to play by Royal Navy rules. British cruisers hunting German raiders? Outgunned, destroyed. British battleships responding to the threat? Outrun. Left watching German sterns disappear over the horizon while convoys burned behind them. 30 seconds to understand that philosophy. And once you do, you understand exactly what the Quorin engineers at Pamet Docks built when they designed the Providence class for the Confederacy of Independent Systems. So here's what I don't understand. The Empire, the Galactic Empire, obsessed with capital ship firepower, paranoid about threats from every direction, got their hands on dozens of operational Providence-class vessels after the Clone Wars ended in 19 BBY. Ships that could outpace anything in their fleet. Ships with firepower that could gut a cruiser before breakfast. Ships designed from the keel up for exactly the kind of warfare the rebellion would eventually wage against them. And they scrapped them, threw them away, sold them for parts or let them rot in orbital junkyards because flying former separatist ships sent the wrong message about imperial legitimacy. That's the decision we're unpacking today. Not whether the Providence was a good ship. You already know it was. That's why you're back. We're talking about the variants you asked about. The Star Destroyer matchup someone literally requested word for word in the comments. And the strategic blindness that turned the Empire's trash into the Rebellion's treasure. Let's start with why these ships look the way they do. The Providence class emerged from the Freedac Volunteers Engineering Corps, Quorin shipwrights working from the orbital yards above Pamet in the years before the Clone Wars officially began in 22 BBY. And the Quorin built ships the way they built everything else, like deep ocean structures. Think about it. On Mon Cala, Quorin engineers designed habitats where damaged sections could be isolated and replaced without compromising the whole. Modular construction. Framework architecture. You don't build a solid wall when you can build a lattice that does the same job with half the material and twice the repairability. Pressure hull fails? Seal it off. Move to the next compartment. Keep working. This wasn't aesthetic preference. This was survival engineering, developed over millennia in crushing ocean depths, where a single structural failure meant death for everyone inside. The Quorin didn't build redundancy into their structures. Redundancy was the structure. Every load-bearing element had a backup. Every critical system had an alternative path. Every compartment could become its own isolated survival pod if everything around it failed. They brought that philosophy to starship construction. And it explains everything about the Providence's skeletal aesthetic that confuses people who expect their warships to look like Republic designs. The exposed superstructure wasn't decorative. It was functional. The Quorin eliminated fully pressurized hulls wherever they could, creating a framework where only essential command sections required life support. Those exposed lattice areas? Maintenance spaces. Accessible to the B-1 battle droids that would handle routine operations in hard vacuum. No atmosphere needed, no wasted mass on life support for spaces where the crew would never go. This approach cut hull mass by approximately 40% compared to equivalent Republic vessels. 40%. That's not a marginal efficiency gain. That's a fundamental reimagining of what a warship needs to be. And the droid automation went deeper than maintenance. Where a Venator-class Star Destroyer required over 7,400 crew members to function effectively, the Providence operated with approximately 600 living officers, supported by battle droids handling everything from damage control to weapons loading. Every cubic meter you don't devote to crew quarters, mess halls, medical facilities, recreation spaces, that's volume you can fill with weapon systems, shield generators, or fighter hangars instead. The reactor output allocation tells the real story here. A Republic capital ship had to maintain constant life support draw across the entire hull. Atmosphere recyclers, temperature regulation, gravity plating, medical bay power reserves, all of it pulling from the same reactor that powered weapons and engines. The Providence? Life support for 600 people in a concentrated section of the ship. The rest of that reactor capacity went straight to the systems that actually win fights. The droid brains offered another advantage Republic vessels couldn't match: computational integration. A Providence's navigation computer didn't just calculate hyperspace jumps. It coordinated with the tactical network, the damage control systems, the fighter deployment protocols. The ship thought faster than organic crews could process information. Not smarter, faster. In combat, where seconds determine survival, that processing speed translated directly into tactical advantage. The CIS didn't build ships that looked different by accident. They built ships that looked different because they'd asked a question the Republic never thought to ask. What happens when you stop designing around biological limitations? Now, the variants. This is what you came back for. 26 of you engaged with a comment specifically asking about the super deadly configuration, and I'm going to tell you exactly which one that is. The Providence class existed in two primary configurations, sharing the same 1,088-meter hull, but serving fundamentally different tactical roles. Understanding both is essential to understanding why the Empire's blanket scrapping decision was so catastrophically wasteful. The Providence-class dreadnought variant was optimized for capital ship engagement. This is your super deadly configuration, a vessel built to win stand-up fights against anything its size. Primary armament: 14 quad heavy turbo-laser cannon emplacements positioned for broadside fire. That's 56 heavy turbo-laser barrels arranged to deliver devastating alpha strikes against enemy capital ships. Secondary battery: 34 dual medium turbo-laser cannons, providing overlapping coverage and sustained damage output. 2 heavy ion cannon emplacements for systems disruption. Knock out an enemy's shields, and those turbo-lasers suddenly hit a lot harder. 12 point defense ion cannons for swatting fighters. 102 proton torpedo tubes for precision strikes against hardened targets or smaller vessels trying to close range. 12 tractor beam projectors to hold targets at optimal engagement distance while the guns did their work. Fighter capacity was limited, approximately 120 Vulture-class droid starfighters. Enough for defensive screening against enemy bomber runs, clearly secondary to that devastating gun battery. The dreadnought variant wasn't designed to win through fighter superiority. It was designed to get in close and murder whatever it was pointing at. Compare that to the Recusant-class light destroyer that made up most separatist fleet numbers. The Recusant mounted a single heavy turbolaser and maybe 4 light turbolasers, a Commerce Raider's armament on a 1,187-meter hull. The Providence dreadnought packed nearly 15 times the heavy turbolaser firepower into a smaller package. It wasn't a destroyer pretending to be a capital ship. It was the genuine article. The Providence-class carrier variant made a different trade. Same hull, different soul. This configuration sacrificed a portion of that devastating armament for expanded hangar facilities, additional launch bays, and droid fighter storage racks, allowing deployment of over 400 Vulture droids and Hyena-class bombers in successive waves. The carrier retained enough defensive guns to protect itself during launch operations, but its primary combat contribution came from overwhelming fighter superiority rather than direct fire support. 400 fighters. Think about that number. A Venator-class carrier deployed 420 starfighters, but those were piloted craft requiring berthing, life support, pilot rotations, and maintenance crews for each individual ship. The Providence carrier achieved comparable fighter numbers with automated craft that could be stored in racks, deployed in minutes, and replaced from shipboard manufacturing facilities if losses mounted. No pilot fatigue, no crew morale, just wave after wave of expendable attack craft. Here's where it gets murky, and I'm going to be honest with you about that. Some sources reference a larger 2,177-meter variant designated as the Providence-class carrier/destroyer, nearly twice the length of the standard hull. This may represent a distinct subclass built for fleet command roles, rather than simply an enlarged carrier. Separatist records weren't exactly preserved with archival care after the war ended. The documentation gets unreliable past this point. What we know. The standard 1088-meter variants existed in both dreadnought and carrier configurations. What we suspect. Larger command variants existed for flag officers and major fleet operations. What we can't confirm. Exactly how many of these larger ships were built, or how their specifications differed from the standard variants beyond raw size. The ambiguity matters because it suggests the Providence class was even more versatile than the commonly discussed variants indicate. A shipyard capable of scaling the design from 1,088 meters to 2,177 meters was a shipyard that understood modular construction at a fundamental level. The Quorin didn't build one ship, they built a platform. Both standard variants achieved acceleration ratings superior to contemporary Republic capital ships of equivalent tonnage. The mass savings from droid automation and skeletal construction combined with power allocation flexibility from reduced life support requirements. The Providence could divert reactor output to engines in ways crew-intensive Republic vessels couldn't match. No risk of suffocating your crew if you redline the drives. Speed, firepower, efficiency. The Scharnhorst philosophy, translated into durasteel and turbo lasers. The Providence class proved itself throughout the Clone Wars in exactly the role it was designed for, and the operational history demonstrates why the Empire should have paid attention. The Lucid Voice coordinated the entire Ryloth blockade in 21 BBY, with Techno-Union foreman Wat Tambor directing the campaign from the planetary surface, while tactical droid TA-175 commanded bridge operations in orbit. The carrier variant deployed successive waves of vulture droids to intercept Republic relief convoys attempting to reach the besieged Twi'lek population below. Here's what made that blockade effective. The Providence's ability to sustain operations without constant resupply. TA-175 didn't need to rotate crews, didn't need to maintain morale, didn't need to worry about food stores or medical emergencies, or any of the 1,000 logistical concerns that plague organic crewed vessels on extended station. The Lucid Voice and its escorts could maintain position indefinitely, launching fighters as needed, recovering and rearming automated craft in cycles that would have exhausted any Republic crew. The droid tactical network allowed coordination that organic crews struggled to match. TA-175 could direct fighter operations across the entire blockade zone simultaneously. No communications lag, no misunderstood orders, no pilots who panicked under fire or got creative at the wrong moment. Every vulture droid received identical targeting data at identical moments. Every bomber wave approached from optimized vectors calculated in milliseconds. The blockade functioned as a single organism rather than a collection of individual ships and pilots. The blockade held until Republic forces committed overwhelming resources to break it. When they finally did, TA-175 urged immediate withdrawal, advice Wat Tambor fatally ignored in his greed to extract every last credit of Ryloth's resources. But the Providence itself performed exactly as designed. The vessel demonstrated carrier variant tactical potential at its finest. Sustained area denial through fighter superiority. Independent raiding operations throughout the mid and outer rim demonstrated the class's true strategic potential. Single Providence dreadnoughts, or small squadrons of 2 to 3 vessels, interdicted Republic supply convoys without the logistical tail larger fleet formations required. A Providence captain needed food, medical supplies, and rotation leave for approximately 600 officers, rather than the 7,400 plus a Venator required. This efficiency enabled sustained independent deployments lasting months at a time, exactly the kind of commerce warfare the Scharnhorst philosophy was designed to enable. Republic naval intelligence documented repeated instances of Providence-class vessels striking convoy routes, overwhelming escorts with superior firepower, and withdrawing to hyperspace before Republic heavy units could respond. The raiders could choose their targets. Convoys protected by nothing heavier than Arquiton's-class cruisers? Easy kills. Convoys with Venator escorts? Withdraw and find softer targets. The Providence could always disengage because it could always outrun the response. The Battle of Coruscant in 19 BBY saw the largest Providence concentration of the war. General Grievous led the assault aboard his flagship, while dozens of additional Providence dreadnoughts and carriers formed the attack fleet's core. Captain Lucros Dauphine, a Neimoidian officer who had survived the disaster at Naboo 13 years earlier, commanded the flagship's bridge operations during the engagement. The assault demonstrated both the class's devastating potential and its critical vulnerability. Providence dreadnoughts punched through Coruscant's orbital defenses, delivering firepower that Republic home fleet units struggled to match. But the battle became a fleet engagement rather than a raid, exactly the scenario the Providence wasn't designed for. Republic reinforcements eventually surrounded the Separatist fleet. Vessels that could have escaped individually found themselves trapped in a general engagement where superior numbers and the inability to withdraw to hyperspace sealed their fate. The Providence excelled when it could choose terms. It died when it couldn't. That's the lesson. Don't get trapped. The rebellion learned it. The Empire never did. Which brings us to the comparison you asked for directly. The Imperial I-class Star Destroyer measured 1,600 meters. The Providence Dreadnought measured 1,088. That's a 50% size advantage, translating into corresponding increases in firepower, shield strength, and internal volume. Raw numbers favor the Star Destroyer in most categories. 60 heavy turbolaser batteries, 60 ion cannons, 10 tractor beam projectors, shield generators drawing from a larger reactor with more extensive coverage. The Star Destroyer's crew requirement exceeded 37,000 personnel: officers, enlisted crew, stormtrooper complement, support staff. And that mass of humanity served weapons batteries that could sustain punishing broadsides for extended engagements. In a static slugging match at close range, the Star Destroyer's firepower and protection would eventually overwhelm the smaller Providence, both sides pumping turbo laser fire into each other until shields collapse and armor fails. The bigger ship with more guns and stronger shields wins that fight. But static slugging matches aren't how the Providence was designed to fight. The Providence's acceleration ratings exceeded the Star Destroyers by a significant margin. Every source agrees on this, even when they disagree on exact figures. The mass differential alone guarantees it. A 1,088-meter ship with 40% less hull mass than equivalent designs will out-accelerate a 1,600-meter vessel optimized for firepower over mobility. The Providence could outrun any Imperial capital ship of comparable tonnage. Full stop. A Providence captain could choose engagement range. Close to deliver devastating strikes with those 14 quad-heavy turbolaser emplacements. Dump a spread of proton torpedoes from 100-plus tubes. Then open distance before the Star Destroyer's superior sustained firepower could tell. Open range to pummel targets with long-range fire, while remaining outside effective counter-battery range. Turbolaser accuracy degrades at distance, and the Providence's speed advantage meant it could maintain whatever range it preferred. The Star Destroyer couldn't chase. The Providence could always leave. Hyperdrive comparison matters here too. The Providence mounted a Class 1.5 hyperdrive, fast by warship standards. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer carried a Class 2.0. In practical terms, the Providence traveled roughly 30% faster through hyperspace. An engagement the Providence chose to break off stayed broken off. No hunting down a fleeing Providence with Star Destroyers alone. But the speed advantage went deeper than raw velocity. The Droid brain integration that coordinated Providence combat systems also accelerated hyperspace calculations. Plotting a jump requires processing astronomical data, calculating gravitational influences, identifying safe routes through real space hazards. Organic navigators took minutes. Droid systems took seconds. A Providence could microjump, short hyperspace hops within a system, faster than a Star Destroyer crew could realize what was happening. This microjump capability transformed tactical options. Losing an engagement? Jump to the system's edge, recalculate, Jump again to a different vector. The Star Destroyer would arrive at your last position to find empty space. By the time they figured out where you'd gone, you'd be 3 jumps ahead and accelerating toward the next system entirely. And then there's crew. 600 living crew for the Providence, 37,000 for the Star Destroyer. That's a 60-to-1 ratio. A Providence captain needed food, medical supplies, and rotation leave for hundreds of officers. A Star Destroyer captain needed those same resources for tens of thousands, plus the infrastructure to support them. Water reclamation for 37,000 people. Food preparation for 37,000 people. Medical facilities for 37,000 people. Entertainment and morale management for 37,000 people trapped in a metal hull for months at a time. Extended independent operations in regions where maintaining Star Destroyer personnel requirements would be logistically impossible? The Providence could do that. The Star Destroyer couldn't. Fighter operations offered the Star Destroyer its clearest advantage. 72 piloted TIE fighters commanded by trained pilots exercising tactical judgment that Vulture droid programming couldn't match. The Vulture brain couldn't adapt to unexpected situations, couldn't recognize traps, couldn't make the creative decisions that turned losing engagements into victories. The Providence carrier variant's 400 automated fighters could overwhelm through numbers, but against disciplined opposition with strong point defense, quality defeats quantity. So here's the honest assessment, because I'm not doing fanboy who would win nonsense. Against a single Star Destroyer with room to maneuver, the Providence dreadnought could dictate engagement terms and potentially prevail through superior mobility. Kite at range, land concentrated fire, withdraw when shields thin, return when the Star Destroyer's damage control teams are still scrambling. The Providence doesn't need to destroy the Star Destroyer. It needs to mission kill it, leave it too damaged to continue pursuit. Against multiple Star Destroyers, the math changes. 2 Star Destroyers can cover each other's angles, prevent the Providence from finding safe range. 3 Star Destroyers can encircle and trap. Against Star Destroyers supported by interdictor cruisers preventing hyperspace escape, the Providence's advantages evaporated entirely. Speed means nothing if you can't run. Superior mobility means nothing if gravity wells force you into the slugging match you were designed to avoid. The Providence was built for selective engagement, not fleet battles. Hit what you want to hit. Run from what you can't beat. Never let the enemy choose the terms. Exactly the kind of warfare the Empire assumed it would never face. The Clone Wars ended in 19 BBY, and suddenly the Empire owned a problem. Thousands of separatist warships, including dozens of operational Providence-class vessels, captured intact at shipyards, or surrendered after the deactivation signal shut down their droid crews. Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin had opinions about what to do with them. Strong opinions. The Tarkin Doctrine emphasized overwhelming force through standardized platforms, specifically the Imperial-class Star Destroyer that would become the Empire's signature vessel. Tarkin's reasoning combined practical and political considerations. Standardization simplified logistics and training. 1 spare parts inventory. 1 maintenance curriculum. 1 tactical doctrine across the entire fleet. But more than that, flying former enemy vessels sent entirely the wrong message about Imperial legitimacy. The Empire was supposed to represent order rising from chaos, strength replacing weakness. Keeping Separatist ships in the fleet suggested the Separatists had built something worth keeping. That couldn't be admitted. The Clone Wars had to be a victory of philosophy as much as firepower, the righteous Republic crushing misguided separatism. Emperor Palpatine endorsed this approach through Imperial Navy directives issued throughout 19 and 18 BBY. Captured Separatist vessels were to be scrapped, dismantled for useful components, or sold to approved salvage operators. The Providence class received no exemption, despite its proven combat capabilities. Imperial naval planners, focused on the Star Destroyer program, saw no role for a droid-automated capital ship in a fleet crewed by loyal Imperial personnel. And here's where it gets interesting. The Venator-class Star Destroyer, the Republic's workhorse carrier throughout the Clone Wars, continued serving the Imperial Navy for over a decade after the Empire formed. Same war, same conflict, but the Venator got converted while the Providence got scrapped. The modifications weren't trivial. Replace clone trooper facilities with standard crew accommodations. Update targeting computers for Imperial protocols. Repaint in Imperial Grey. Adjust hangar configurations for the shift from V-Wings and ARC-170s to early TIE variants. But the fundamental ships remained operational. The Empire invested resources in converting Venators because Venators represented the Republic's strength. The distinction wasn't practical. It was political. Venators were Republic ships that could be rehabilitated. Providences were enemy vessels that had to be destroyed. The Empire found value in one, but not the other, despite both classes proving their combat worth throughout the same war. Ideology over utility, symbolism over strategy, pride over pragmatism. The scrapping directive applied to the Imperial Navy, but the Empire's disposal wasn't immediate, wasn't complete, and created consequences they spent 2 decades regretting. Some Providence-class hulls sat in orbital junkyards for years. Droid crews deactivated, systems otherwise intact. The Empire didn't have the shipyard capacity to scrap everything at once. There were simply too many separatist vessels. So the hulls waited, rusting in place, waiting for someone to find value the Empire refused to see. Others were stripped of weapons and sold to entities the Imperial Navy considered acceptable. The Corporate Sector Authority, operating under Imperial Charter but with substantial autonomy in the corporate sector, acquired decommissioned Providence hulls and actually flew them. The CSA valued the Providence's massive internal volumes for bulk transport, even without full military capability. Armed merchantmen, convoy escorts. The same modular construction that made the Providence easy to maintain with droids made it easy to reconfigure for corporate use. The CSA represented exactly the kind of pragmatic thinking the Imperial Navy's ideological rigidity prevented. They didn't care what the ships had been. They cared what the ships could do. A Providence with its heavy turbo lasers stripped could still carry cargo, could still defend convoys against pirates, could still project corporate authority in systems where the alternative was anarchy. The criminal underworld absorbed a significant number throughout the first decade of Imperial rule. Stripped of their heaviest armament, but still formidable, Providence-class ships appeared in pirate flotillas and Hutt cartel enforcement fleets. The Outer Rim, where Imperial presence remained thin despite the Empire's territorial claims, saw a particular concentration of these vessels. A Providence without its full weapons load could still intimidate, could still outrun most pursuit, could still carry cargo and fighters and whatever else a criminal enterprise needed moved. The Hutts proved especially eager buyers. A Providence flying Hutt colors sent a message that smaller vessels couldn't match. This organization has resources. This organization has reach. This organization will hunt you down if you cross them, and you won't be able to outrun what they send. Imperial patrols occasionally engaged former Providence-class ships flying criminal colors. The encounters rarely made official reports that survived the Empire's collapse. Admitting you'd fought your own discarded hardware wasn't a career-enhancing move. But they happened. Former Imperial property turned against the Empire because the Empire couldn't be bothered to properly dispose of it. And the battle droids? Deactivated en masse by the shutdown signal, they found second lives with groups willing to restore their programming. The Rebel Alliance, perpetually short of personnel, eventually employed B-1 and B-2 battle droids in ground operations where their limitations mattered less than their availability. A droid that can hold a defensive position and shoot at stormtroopers is a droid you don't have to recruit, train, feed, or mourn. The Recusant-class light destroyer and the Lucrehulk-class battleship have better documented post-war careers than the Providence. Both appeared in corporate, criminal, and eventually rebel-affiliated service throughout the Galactic Civil War era. The Providence's relative scarcity in these records may reflect its higher value as scrap. Those extensive weapon systems made it a priority for Imperial dismantling. Or it may simply reflect gaps in surviving documentation. Wars destroy records as surely as they destroy ships. But the principle was clear. CIS technology retained military value long after the Confederacy's defeat. The ships, the droids, the weapons systems, all of it still worked. All of it could still kill. What would an Imperial Providence have looked like? The question haunts military theorists who study this period. The conversion would have required significant modification. Crew stations replacing droid automation, though even a partial crew requirement would have been dramatically lower than Star Destroyer standards. You'd need officers for command functions, engineering oversight, weapons targeting. Maybe 2,000 crew instead of 600, but that's still a fraction of the Star Destroyer's 37,000. Imperial weapons systems would standardize ammunition and targeting protocols. The heavy turbolasers wouldn't need replacement. Turbolaser technology remained fundamentally similar across factions. But fire control systems, communications equipment, and IFF transponders would all require updating to Imperial standards. Hangar modifications for TIE fighter compatibility would have been the most significant structural change. Vulture droids stored in compact racks, folding their wings for dense packing. TIEs required different infrastructure: launch bays, recovery tractors, pilot support facilities. The Providence carrier variant might have seen its fighter capacity drop from 400 automated craft to perhaps 200 piloted TIEs. Still substantial, still operationally significant. The Venator transition proved these conversions were possible. The Empire did it for one class. They could have done it for another. Picture an Imperial Providence raider fleet operating in the Outer Rim. 3 vessels, maybe 4. Enough crew to support a few thousand officers each, rather than the tens of thousands a Star Destroyer deployment demands. Fast enough to outrun anything they couldn't outfight. Armed enough to outfight anything they couldn't outrun. Rebel supply convoys? Intercepted before they reach their destinations. Rebel bases and systems where Star Destroyers can't sustain operations? Suddenly reachable. Rebel corvettes and frigates that simply outran standard Imperial pursuit craft? No longer safe. The Imperial Navy had a commerce raiding problem. The rebellion relied on supply lines the same as any military force. Stolen materiel, smuggled weapons, food and medicine for hidden bases. Those supply lines were vulnerable. But Star Destroyers were too expensive, too crew-intensive, too slow to hunt them effectively. A single Star Destroyer parked at a strategic hyperspace junction could intimidate. But intimidation doesn't catch blockade runners. Intimidation doesn't intercept supply shipments in the vast emptiness between systems. Intimidation doesn't adapt when Rebel logistics routes shift to avoid known Imperial positions. The Providence was designed for exactly this mission. The Empire threw it away and then wondered why Rebel supplies kept getting through. An Imperial Providence squadron could have operated for months in hostile space, intercepting everything from medical freighters to weapons shipments. Could have maintained presence in contested regions where rotating Star Destroyer deployments created gaps the rebellion exploited. Could have chased down the fast Rebel transports that made hyperspace jumps before lumbering Star Destroyers could close. 4 Providence raiders operating independently could have covered more space than a dozen Star Destroyers operating from fixed positions. The math isn't even close. Instead, the Empire built more Star Destroyers, thousands of them. Identical vessels optimized for fighting the separatist droid fleets that no longer existed, rather than the guerrilla insurgency that did. This brings us to the tragedy of the Providence class. Not that the Empire scrapped capable warships. Militaries routinely discard equipment during peacetime transitions. The tragedy is that they scrapped warships designed for exactly the kind of warfare they'd eventually face, while building warships designed for warfare that never materialized. The Tarkin doctrine assumed enemies would be planetary concentrations crushable through overwhelming Star Destroyer presence. It assumed naval warfare would consist of set-piece engagements where firepower determined outcomes. It assumed the Empire would always control strategic initiative, always force battles on its terms, always have enough ships to project power wherever needed. The rebellion refused every single one of these assumptions. They operated from systems where Star Destroyer deployment was logistically unsustainable. Hoth, Yavin, dozens of hidden bases in the galactic backwaters where maintaining a 37,000-person crew simply wasn't possible. They struck where the Empire was weak and vanished before the ponderous Imperial fleet could respond. They fought exactly the kind of asymmetric conflict the Providence-class was designed to win. Fast raiders choosing their engagements, independent operators patrolling without massive crew support requirements, commerce raiders disrupting Imperial supply lines while dancing away from Star Destroyer pursuit. The Scharnhorst philosophy, in space, against an empire that had thrown away the ships built to execute it. The ships the Empire considered politically inconvenient became ships that criminals, pirates, and eventually rebels flew against Imperial patrols. The secondary market created by Imperial disposal decisions armed the Empire's future enemies with vessels the Empire then had to fight. And the Providence class represented the most capable vessels in this dispersal. The principle they demonstrate is absolute. The Empire threw away military assets and faced the consequences when those assets found new owners. The Providence's legacy isn't as a separatist ship. It's not even as a warship, really. It's as proof that ideology makes militaries stupid, that political symbolism costs lives, that throwing away your enemy's best weapons because you're too proud to use them is a decision that echoes for decades. The Quorin engineers at Pamet Docks asked the right question. What happens when you stop designing around biological limitations? The answer was a ship that could outfight cruisers, outrun battleships, and sustain independent operations that would exhaust any organic crewed vessel. The Germans figured it out in the 1930s with the Scharnhorst. The Separatists figured it out with the Providence. The Empire had the answer handed to them on a Durasteel platter, and they scrapped it for parts because they couldn't stomach flying ships with Confederacy heritage. The Scharnhorst philosophy outlived the faction that built it. Outgun what you can't outrun. Outrun what you can't outgun. Simple doctrine. Elegant execution. The Empire could have had that. Instead, they melted it down and built more Star Destroyers. Identical Star Destroyers. Standardized Star Destroyers. Star Destroyers that couldn't catch rebel blockade runners, couldn't sustain presence in the Outer Rim, couldn't adapt to an enemy that refused to fight the war the Empire prepared for. Some lessons you learn from history. Others you learn the hard way. The Empire chose the hard way. Every time. Subscribe for more stories like this.